Well, greetings, my friends. I hope you're all doing well. My next guest is living proof that ancient Egypt still has secrets to unravel. In this case, specifically, secrets of the stars. Martin Goldsmith owns a PhD in the history of science, and he takes that academic discipline and rigor into his esoteric studies. He's gone through amazing and impressive efforts to do the research for his latest book, Temple of the Stars, which explores the significance of the Decans in Egyptian astrology as well as Egyptian astrology as a whole. Now, as someone with no real knowledge of Egyptian astrology, I found the book quite fascinating. But its rigor and its insight are sure to offer a lot for all of you hardcore astrologers out there, but also just all of you hardcore esoteric studies, alternative spiritual study enthusiasts, however you would like to frame it. It's an excellent book with a lot of depth that can appeal to people who have no real knowledge of the subject, but also to people who have very deep knowledge of the subject. It's a very well written book, and it's very, very well worth your time. And so, with that, and with no further ado, here is my interview with Martin Goldsmith about his most recent book, Temple of the Stars. Thank you very much, my friends. All right, Martin, thank you so much for taking the time to talk today. I really appreciate it. Even though astrology is not my field of expertise, it's something that I'm very interested in. And I found reading the PDF of your work that you sent to be very fascinating, Temple of the Stars. And so the general thrust or the main thrust of the book is reestablishing the importance of decans in astrology. And so, could you just explain to people exactly what the decans are?
Okay, well, I pronounce it Decans, although to tell you the truth,
Well,
I'm not even sure
there's
whether
my
that's
lack of
right.
knowledge there.
No, I'm not correcting you because it's just the way I say it.
Mm.
But yeah, a decan comes from the Latin word decim, which means 10. And so these are 10-degree segments of the zodiac, which means that that they're three to a sign, because each sign, there are 12 signs, 360 degrees in a circle. And so um, every sign has 30 degrees, and there are three decans per sign. And the thing is that, no one particularly uses them in modern astrology, basically because they don't add very much.
Mm.
But once I realized that the Egyptians' astrological system was completely and totally based on the decans, then I got really interested and started researching them.
Hmm.
So, they're 10-degree segments. And the thing is that they're very different from one another. So in other words, if you're a Taurus, whether you're born in the first, second, or third decan has a giant effect in terms of how that sign manifests. It's not the same throughout.
Hmm.
So and my research shows that this really does work. It's
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
solid.
the book, it relies like you're taking Egyptian astrology, which contrasts with Greco-Babylonian traditions. And so, could you just explain what that difference is?
Okay, first of all, they're completely and totally independent. They developed entirely separately. And the Greek system, which is what modern astrology is Greek, is borrowed from the Babylonian system, which was very mathematical. I mean, they actually had, very good observations of the heavens, and knew how to track the planets and to predict eclipses and things like that. They were very mathematically adept. Now, the Greeks picked up on that and took it sort of in a similar way, although they didn't really see the planets as gods, which the Babylonians did see the planets as gods. The Greeks thought them more as archetypes or archetypal ideas or something on that level. Now, the Egyptian astrology was entirely funerary. The astrological diagrams are found almost entirely either on the ceilings of tombs or on the inside of coffin lids. So the point of the Egyptian astrology was to help to guide the soul of the dead. So it had nothing to do. It wasn't personal. It had nothing to do with unique individuality or predicting anything, whatever. What it was a map of where the soul of the dead person was about to go in their travels through the heavens, and to offer them protection in that travels. Now, each one of the deckhands had a god, and so the pictures of the gods in the tomb and on the coffin lids were protective. In other words, they were designed to bring the power of the god towards the person in order to protect them. So the Egyptian system is basically a magical system of talismans and amulets. It's not, it's completely different in its purposes, first of all. And the other thing, what I discovered in studying them, because when I first started studying them, I realized that I didn't really understand them, because there's a lot of misconceptions about it. There's a tendency to project Greek astrology onto Egyptian astrology and make it mathematical, like, really dumb mathematics. And it's, I'm not one of these people that, tries to overblow the Egyptian science. But at the same time, they certainly knew how to divide a circle into 36 parts. That was easy enough. And they didn't do it. So sometimes they're 36, sometimes they're 38, sometimes they're like 50. Generally, it's 36. I mean, it's generally around that, but they're not even evenly divided. So what I realize is that, it's not a mathematical system. It has nothing mathematical about it, and it's not based on observation of the heavens. The important thing is to have the pictures of the gods to protect the soul in its travels in the afterlife. So that's the basic thing. And what was sort of amazing about the whole thing is, the Greeks took over Egypt in around 350 BC. And they had a lot of respect for Egypt, and they were very interested in their religion, which they thought was the basis of their own religion. And so the gods started merging. But what was interesting is, even though there was now Greek astrology in Alexandria, which was the capital of the, it's up near the Mediterranean, that even though there was this Greek astrology that was mathematical and that predicted things and that, was astronomically sophisticated, the systems did not really connect with each other. And you can find the Egyptian funerary astrology into 200 AD, it goes on and on. And so, for instance, the Dendera zodiac, round zodiac, which is, Greek in the sense that it's circular, and it has the Decan gods, the Egyptian Decan gods, but at the same time, first of all, the Egyptian Decan gods are not divided evenly at all. They're kind of all over the place. And they put in the Greek zodiac. You can see the 12 signs of the Greek zodiac, but that's it. Basically the purpose of it is the same as Egyptian astrology had always been, which was to protect the soul in the afterlife. So from the Egyptian point of view, nothing particularly changed with the Greeks taking over. The Greeks, on the other hand, absorbed the Decans into their system. And they were very interested in magic, and the Egyptians in the ancient world had the reputation of being the greatest magicians in the ancient world. So there were books on magic, and the Greeks translated them as best they could, because they didn't know it. Hieroglyphics, really. And hieroglyphics I tried to learn it. It's terribly difficult.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, it's awful. Because, some of them are word pictures, some of them are syllables. I'll give you an example. Like, if the syllable ta appears in a word, because ta is a god, it has to go to the beginning of the word, even if it's pronounced as the last syllable.
Wow.
It just, it's really, really hard, basically. It's a very, very hard language, and they didn't figure it out. And this had a huge effect on the Deccan tradition, because around 300 AD, there was no longer anyone that knew hieroglyphics. Even the Egyptians didn't know it. So, once you get to the Renaissance and there are these decans, they're totally distorted because they're not connected with the words, because these pictures of the decans would have, the names of the gods and things like that on them in hieroglyphics. And they had just, insane ideas of how to translate that stuff. And they thought they were translating it, but it was ridiculous.
That's really interesting. And so those misinterpretations or mistranslations, they kind of just carried over time. And
they carried over time, and it was interesting because once the Greeks adopted this, and the Greeks had a big empire, and then they were taken over by the Romans, who had an even bigger empire. So these deckhand figures traveled into India and China, and all over Europe. The Arabic world was really into them because the Arabs were really into magic and astronomy as well. They were very good astronomers and mathematicians. There are all these different versions, and in the book I give an example of how it got distorted. In one of the Indian systems, there's the first decan of Cancer it says a terrible woman with a noose, and that's almost always Isis holding an ankh in the Egyptian versions, and the ankh is a symbol of life, and it's a looped cross.
Right.
Obviously, it had come to the Indians in the form of picture, and they thought that ankh was a noose. So they turned the symbol of life into a symbol of death.
That's a pretty big mistranslation.
It just went on and on like that, and so by the time it got to the Renaissance, there was just so little left of the original thing. But it was still considered very powerful because the texts, the Hermetic texts that was coming out of ancient Greece and the Ptolemaic period, 300 BC to 400 AD or something like that. Those texts gave great power to the decans, and they were used in magic. And so the decans traveled through Europe not as part of astrology, but as part of magic.
Interesting.
And they were used to make magical rings. You take a picture of a Egyptian god that, let's say, was associated with the second decan of Libra, and engrave that picture on a particular gemstone and put it in a ring, and that would be a magical ring. And these kinds of books that were based on it, supposedly Egyptian, then from Egyptian to Greek, from Greek to Arabic. And then when there was the reconquest of Spain in the High Middle Ages, they took all these Arabic texts and started translating them into Latin. And that's how the Deccan tradition arrived in the Renaissance, was through all of these translations, first of all, just of languages, of hieroglyphics to Greek to Arabic to Latin. And so, and each one of those transitions is going to lose or change or whatever. It's like the game of telephone that kids play, it just ends up being sort of gibberish. And the same thing happened with the names, because what would have been the name of a god or something like that, ended up becoming abracadabra, or these words of power that really didn't mean anything.
Oh, the barbarous names. Yeah.
Barbarous names. Yeah. And, that was a major part of magic in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, those barbarous names. And, in the Egyptian, they were often things like the beginning of the jar stand, or Osiris' right arm, or something. That was what they began as. And then they ended up as abracadabra, or, what's the Harry Potter one?
I got my friends' kids are always saying that. Yeah, I don't know what it is, but they're always saying that to me and zapping me.
But yeah, it's that kind of an idea. So I found I got real interested because I traveled, was traveling in Italy, and there's this Palazzo Schifanoia that was built in the Renaissance. It's a 72-foot long room that's floor to ceiling astrological pictures.
Hmm.
And the middle tier is the 36 decans. And so I bought a book at the gift shop that was actually a really good history book on the decans.
Oh, really? Those gift
Yeah,
shops really don't have the best
it had a
stuff.
lot of pictures, but I mean, it was a really good book.
That's cool.
And, in Italian, which I read. So that really got me started. And I got pretty obsessed.
Hmm.
Um,
And in what about what year was this?
this was in the early 80s.
Oh, wow. So it's launched you on a long
It
study.
was a very long thing. Yeah. I mean, once I had been to the Palazzo Schifanoia and realized that these were a big deal in the Renaissance and that they were originally Egyptian, and I mean, it was just real exciting stuff.
Right.
So then I was living in Vermont at the time, and I um, drove down to Brown University in Providence and copied these books in German that were academic books on the decans that I had discovered were important.
Hmm.
And then I hired a German tutor to teach me German.
Wow, man, that's some dedication.
Well, I think it's obsession, as much as dedication. But yeah, I guess it's dedication. So at any rate, at a certain point, and then I hired somebody to translate Greek decan systems. I learned enough Latin to translate some of the medieval systems from Latin. And at a certain point, I thought I really belong in graduate school because this is. But I wasn't going to study in graduate school because academia is just completely against the occult, and I
Right.
didn't realize it at the time. But history of science is particularly against the occult because
Hmm.
it draws all of these hard scientists. A lot of people in our department had been chemists or physicists or whatever, and so they had all this prejudice against astrology. And then if you study the early modern period, you have to learn the astrology because it was a really big deal.
Hmm.
Everyone believed in it. The popes had astrologers, the kings all had astrologers, and it was taught in medical school. It was it was everywhere. And so they know astrology, but they had this. So anyway, I had to be completely in the closet about my interests.
Right.
A lot of my papers were on magic and the occult and stuff like that. I
Hmm.
realized at a certain point that it was very difficult to get a job doing that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
But it was what I was interested in, so I kind of didn't care on some level.
Right.
There were a few people that managed to get jobs, and they were a beleaguered group because they were under attack a lot. Actually, just even
Right.
doing the history of occultism could get you attacked,
Wow.
and did.
Wow. Yeah, I
And
mean, like all jokes about obsession aside, that's really exciting because this is truly original research. I mean, you were having texts translated from other languages, nowadays, not that there's anything wrong with this, but often, books they're just taking other kind of more recent books and reconstituting that kind of research. But this is like truly,
now I have South Node in Scorpio, and so it's sort of like I try to get into things in depth. And the thing about languages is that I'm good at languages, and I come from a family that's very good. My brother is amazing. He knows Russian and Japanese, and
wow,
all
those are
these.
too difficult. I study Russian as well. It's tough, man. I've been studying it for a while and it's hard.
These are hard languages, and I ask him how did you pick up German? Because I found German actually very difficult, and he says, "Oh, I just picked it up." He never even studied it; it just came to him. At any rate, when I did my academic work, I basically didn't shy away from languages. You know, if I had to read something in a foreign language, I just would.
Hmm.
And, it was difficult. But, it just seemed like, well, you need to read all the research in the field that you're doing that's
Right.
important. And so that's what you do. And I spent 2 full weeks in the Library of Congress studying this Egyptian stuff.
Wow.
And it was weird because, the Library of Congress, half of it has been stolen. It's really sad. And they closed off the stacks. And I finally just got so sick of them saying the books didn't exist or whatever that I just snuck into the stacks and
Oh,
found where
really?
they all were. And I had them I was sitting on the ground with these piles of books around me. And, library workers would come by and they'd look at me and I didn't have a tag or anything, they just kind of like, nod or something and go on. But, it was very hard because in terms of astrology, there's only one other book on the Decans, and it's really, really quite dark.
And
And
in what way?
well, he's into Crowley just to begin with.
And who was the author? Do you recall?
I do know his name. What is it? It doesn't come to mind right now.
It's fine. So, like dark in what way?
Well, okay, an example, like, the third decan of Pisces, he calls the cup of blood. The
Oh,
third decan of Gemini is like, the executioner's sword or something like that. So, and it's very much based on sort of the grimoire magical tradition of the
I
Middle
see.
Ages. Now, he does talk about making etchings on stones. In other words, he actually is more connected to the medieval magical tradition than I am, definitely. And it's not like, it's a book without insight. It has insight, but I don't. And it's also just, I've got a PhD in history, so I have more discipline, basically.
Right, right.
I approach things in a more disciplined way.
So so he took it to like very magically or like we're more magically oriented direction. For you, what is the primary significance of adding the decans to the study of astrology? Like how does it modify the study of the field as a whole?
Um, my general sense is that my work on it, which is empirically based, gives a lot of extremely specific information for each decan, and I do think they're quite powerful. So there's a way in which I consider them very important. I mean, the things I've written books on, like moon phases and degree symbols, are things that I consider very important in astrology. And my approach is very imagistic. I come up with symbols for things. And so I have a symbol for each of the 36 decans. And it's more like a tarot symbol than, the God thing I had to reject because it just did not seem like there was anything godlike about the decans. So
They're more just like archetypal forces.
yeah, I basically see them sort of as human situations that are sort of tarot-like. Like one of the tarot, one of them, I have the Pied Piper walking up. That's the first decan of Aquarius, and it's practically the Fool card of the tarot, and it has a lot of the same qualities as the Fool card of the tarot. Of learning to trust your own intuition and go off on some path that is untraveled.
Right.
That seemed to me to be the most accurate way of describing what I was seeing in the decans, because I wasn't going to just rely, I'm obviously not going to rely on the Egyptian thing because, I'm just not into a funerary. I don't even buy their ideas about the afterlife. I'm not,
right.
I'm not convinced that those kinds of things happen. And the Greek system, which is based on magic and whatever. I mean, there are a million different systems you could choose from, but I did the research and I basically came up with symbols that I thought described the examples that I was seeing. And I collect data, and so say when I'm studying the first decan of Taurus, I would collect 200 examples of famous people that have the sun in that decan, 200
Right.
examples
Yeah,
for
you mentioned
Mercury,
that before. That's
200
really
examples
interesting.
for Venus, 200, all of the planets, even the moon, and then analyze each one of these lists separately and then put them together. Start saying, okay, what are the main themes? It's very much sort of triangulation. Um, if they all have this decan in common, then there needs to be something that you can see that's common. And you eventually arrive at that. And it took years.
Oh, that's amazing. So when you say you're looking at like personality characteristics or aspects of their lives, or like what were the variables that interwove?
More personality characteristics, because although I'm a Gemini, so I know a lot of just gossip about people or whatever. I've been into personality for all my life because I got into astrology when I was 20, basically.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, it's more personality than anything else, but also just as I said, sort of the challenges that people face. What are the things they're trying to work out?
Mm.
What's their trip? What are they projecting onto their reality? What is important to them and what is unimportant to them.
Mm.
So those kinds of things. And so I think it actually is really useful in terms of, sort of psychology in a way, in the same way that, modern astrology does try to be essentially a psychological sort of science. And I think it's in that tradition, basically.
And
So I
so
mean, it's in the Greek tradition,
right, right,
not
right.
in the Egyptian tradition. I do bring up, if the Egyptian god that's often appears there fits with what I've discovered, I will talk about it
Hmm.
because I think it gives depth to the interpretation. But some of them I don't talk about the Egyptian god at all because, they don't seem to fit.
Hmm.
I mean, this idea that something is true just because it's old it's not, my training is in science. I have a BA in biochemistry.
Hmm.
So it's sort of like traditionalism is not something that holds much water for me at all.
Hmm.
I'm
That's
willing to
no.
look at traditional ideas, but I'm not going to believe them just because they're traditional.
Okay, that's interesting because I was wondering like seems like maybe something was a little bit lost by the loss of the Decans, but you do view the understanding of astrology also as something that has evolved in some ways in a positive sense. Like we've learned new things and better things over time. It's not all knowledge that's been lost. Is that correct?
It is, but the field is really stuck in traditionalism. It's very stuck,
Hmm.
and and I would say it's stuck basically in Ptolemy. Ptolemy is second century AD Greek who wrote in Alexandria. He was an Alexandrian Greek, and a genius in everything. But like, there's this movement in astrology called Project Hindsight, and they'll translate these old books and just act as if, well, this has got to be true because it's old.
Hmm.
That's if that were true, like we'd still be bleeding people for medicine. Uh, and so I've run into a lot of what I call fundamentalism, traditionalist fundamentalism within astrology. That's um, poisonous, basically, and very repressive as well.
Hmm.
I found a great deal of intellectual bullying, both in academia and also in the astrological community. There's a huge amount of it.
It seems to just be part of the part of human nature, like these established like truths. They just get to dictate to everybody else and push everybody else around. So yeah, I know to which you refer. And so this book for modern astrologers, how would this book, your book, I mean,
Yeah, right.
be useful to modern astrologers? Somebody who's actually maybe doing it for a living or somebody who's just deeply interested. How could they incorporate your book into their studies?
I don't think there would be any problem at all. They would just, look and see particularly like, okay, where's this person? What decan is this person's sun in? What decan is their moon in? What decan is their ascendant in? Read the descriptions that I've written
Hmm.
and look at the symbols and look at the examples, because I give examples for each decan, and they'll just understand the person a lot better.
Hmm.
It's a lot more detailed information than you could otherwise get. And it's pretty unorthodox in a lot of ways, because I don't buy rulership, for instance. I
Hmm.
found with decans that there are multiple planetary influences in every decan, and that the older view that, oh, one planet rules each decan, that's the Greek view, the Babylonian and Greek view. And there were various different systems of that, but none of them particularly worked.
Hmm.
It's useless. It was worse than useless, and it's why people don't use them, because they don't tell you very much.
You mean the prior understanding of the Decans was so inaccurate, that's why people don't use them.
Right,
Okay.
right. And
But
so,
with, oh, go ahead, please.
well, when I first started studying them, I tried to come up with a system of my own that was more accurate according to my research.
Mhm.
But eventually I realized, well, the only thing you can say is that the ruler of the sign as a whole tends to be a very important planet in the first decan of each sign. So, but I finally just, and I even say it in the book, I'm saying, look, I'm not creating another system here. I'm just working off of the research. What am I actually seeing in the examples? So, for instance, with Virgo in the old system, the second decan would be ruled by Saturn, and it's not. It has a much stronger Venus quality.
Hmm.
And the next decan has the Saturn quality, the
Hmm.
third decan. And it's not, I finally realized there's just no point in me trying to explain this. I'm just going to put it out there that that's what it is, because
Hmm.
that's what I discovered. So I gave up on this idea of making some easily memorized system out of it.
Interesting. So how would you say the planets do like I guess I should ask it this way. What do you think the influence is of the planets if they can't be categorized so neatly into these decans? Like in your astrological paradigm, the role of the classical planets, how do you perceive it?
Yeah, well, I have at the end of the book, I have an essay called On the Nature of Planetary Influence. And it's the most radical part of the book, because I'm basically saying that planetary influence does not come from above, it comes from within the signs and is part of the electromagnetic aura of the Earth. Um,
Interesting.
and everyone has access to these energies of every decan and every planet. It's all there for us. Um, but there are multiple influences in decans, and so for it, I'll give you an example. Like for the first decan of Pisces, my symbol is a ship in a storm. The captain is forging ahead, and this woman is complaining and saying, "Look, you're going to sink our ship. We need to be going there." And she's pointing to a globe. So the captain is sort of Mars. The woman is Jupiter, and she's pointing to the globe, which is also Jupiter because it's worldview.
Hmm.
And then the sea outside is Neptune. The chaos of the sea outside is Neptune. So it's a particular confirmation of different influences that you can even see in the symbol.
Hmm.
But they relate to each other in different ways, and so Jupiter in another decan may have a very different sort of function. It can operate differently in each decan, and often does.
Interesting. So I want to make sure I'm interpreting correctly. So the basic influences you're saying they're not emanating from the planets.
Yeah,
That's
they're
so
not
coming
emanating
from
they
the electromagnetic field of the Earth.
of the Earth.
Could you
Yeah,
just expand on that a little bit more? Because that's really interesting.
it's it's a difficult concept, and I had a hard time writing that essay because it was kind of like, I don't like to write things that I don't really believe. I mean, I have to be convinced of something myself before I write it. But then I'm thinking, look, I'm old. I need to put some of these ideas out there. And I pared it down. Okay, I don't really, that might not be right. Those kinds of things are going through my head. But I'll give you, one of my pieces of evidence for this, which I think is illuminating, which is when I did a book on the moon phases.
Mm-hmm.
What I discovered was that the moon phases had zodiacal qualities. So the waxing trine between the sun and the moon,
Mm-hmm.
which, is sort of like just past the first quarter, is a Cancer phase. And because of that, there's a lunar influence in that. Well, okay, that's a bad example because it's the moon. But let's say the waxing square. So the waxing square is the sign Gemini, beginning the sign Gemini. And so it has a mercurial influence, even though the only two planets involved here are the sun and the moon.
Hmm.
The Mercury in the heavens is not involved at all.
I see.
It's the moon. So, what I finally ended up deciding was, well, first of all, another thing that you saw in studying the decans was that almost any planet would express itself the same way in every decan.
Hmm.
And furthermore, what the planetary influence of the decan itself is what would be expressed. So, for instance, the first decan of Aries is generally thought of as being ruled by Mars. But if, say, you have Saturn in the first decan of Aries when you were born, that Saturn actually shows itself as Mars. It doesn't act as Saturn, it acts as Mars because it's activating almost electrically this planetary energy that's in the decan.
Okay.
And the decans are part of the zodiacal belt. They're like, and to me, the zodiacal belt is not up there because we already know, from the precession of the equinoxes that the influence doesn't come from stars. The constellations are not in the same place they used to be.
Hmm.
And people really haven't, figured out, well, where is the influence coming from?
Right.
And so, I'm putting this forward because, I've got enough evidence to say, well, I think they're coming from the electromagnetic field of the Earth.
Interesting. So why, and I hope I'm not asking stupid questions here,
You
but
haven't asked a stupid question yet.
okay. So if it's emanating from the electromagnetic energies around the Earth, why why did the planets become associated with them? Was it just because like while the people were experiencing these influences, that's where the stars happened to be? Or is there still a relation between the stars and the electromagnetic influence?
That's a very difficult question, actually.
Okay.
There is a relation between for instance, say you just look at Venus, not in terms of a decan, but in terms of the sign. So Venus and Taurus, let's say.
Hmm.
Um, it does affect things in a sort of a traditional way. It's not as if it disappears, the Venus influence disappears. One of the main things I'm really saying is that the planets are a lot less powerful than
Okay.
they appear to be in the Babylonian and Greek tradition. Now, in
Hmm.
the Egyptian tradition, they just aren't there practically. They're
Wow.
not important at all.
Hmm.
But as I said, the Egyptian tradition, is not astronomical particularly.
Hmm.
So,
It's
but
interesting
yeah,
implications of that to like all of Western esotericism because like the Hermetic tradition, all these different traditions, they conceptualize the planets as being very significant. And so this would really reroute a lot of that thinking, like beyond astrology. It would extend to a lot of just general esoteric thought.
Well, yeah, and I think, I mean, see, the thing is that, once, if you're trapped in traditionalism, you're basically also sort of trapped in Babylonian ideas of these gods, like uh, making things happen on Earth, you know.
Mm.
And the Greeks, in a way, they're not that different. I mean, they have, like, the gods up there playing their chess sets of, with Odysseus and whatever, like, they're controlling events. And so this idea of control through planetary influence is something that's part of the tradition. And my own sense of the planets is that they're closer to a kind of, let's say, a human genius of, the most Martian people that have ever existed. Their consciousness is in that Mars space, and it's available.
Mm.
It's available to anyone that can plug into it in whatever way they can. So my general view of the planets is very, very different. And I think that it's a lot friendlier, for one thing, that they're all allies. They're not like, and that's another, high horse I want to get on, is like, this idea that they're malefics, that, Saturn is this horrible planet that's going to do all kinds of terrible things to you. And it's, demonic, these demonic, it's like, what in the hell is that? It's like, so it's like, what? God made the universe to include, like, just totally negative stuff that has all this power. It just really comes out of a totally awful spiritual tradition. And it really is Babylonian, because the Babylonians, most of their gods were nasty. A lot of war gods.
Right. That's even like modern Gnostics, which are this is a very loose term because they're not all like they don't all look at things exactly as the Christian Gnostics did. But you have a lot of Gnostics out there, and they're people I respect. I'm not trying to criticize them or anything, but they very much have that view that this is a prison reality.
Yes.
All of the planets are these archonic forces that are keeping us in check, and
Yeah.
a very grim view.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I appreciate what you're saying, because even with Saturn, it's like you look at Saturn as imposing structure on things, and people look at that as a purely like nefarious act. But I appreciate what you say, because to me, it's like you can't get anything done without some kind of structure being imposed on it. Like, like without a structure being imposed or a plan or something, it's just everyone running around with no purpose and no direction. Like that's important in a positive sense. We need that kind of structure to make anything happen,
Yeah. Yeah. So, and just on the Gnosticism stuff, my first year in graduate school, I had this really nasty teacher that was German, and he spoke with a really thick German accent. I was always bringing up,
nasty teacher. The perfect nasty teacher has the strong
he
German.
wore a waistcoat and smoked a pipe and tried to make everyone cry, especially the women in the class. I mean, he was mean. And so anyway, I was always, because I'm a double Gemini, I was always like, yeah, raising my hand, and he would just go, you and your Gnosticism. Because I was really into it, and I'd been reading a lot of stuff about Gnosticism.
Oh, really? So you were a Gnostic at that age?
Yeah. Well, I was old when I went to graduate school. I had been out of school for 18 years, 16 years. 16
Interesting.
Years. So I wasn't a spring chicken. No, I was really into Gnosticism. I've studied the Kabbalah and, most of the Hermetic tradition I'm at least familiar with.
Hmm.
And I definitely considered myself a Gnostic, but not a negative Gnostic. In other words, this idea that the earth is a horrible place, I don't buy that,
Hmm.
or the idea that the planets are demonic and, are trying to trap you or whatever. I do think this is a learning experience, and that there are things you need to learn from each planet and through each planet, and some of that stuff is negative. Some of it, parts of the learning curve are negative. I mean, I've certainly learned from negative things that have happened in my life in very important lessons.
Right.
And sometimes I'm smart enough to be grateful, and sometimes it takes a long time to see that was a good thing. Some of the things that seem really bad, if you look back on them much later, you realize, no, that should have happened. That had to happen. That there was a reason for that. But we're so blind, we just don't see it often.
Yeah, I love that you went there, Martin. Honestly, because you're an academic, you're a scholar, so I wasn't really sure if you'd want to go into your own ideas about what this whole life is about, but I wanted to ask, so I'm glad that you. I mean, you've spent your life immersed in these things, and I was just really curious. So at this point, how do you perceive the purpose of this reality of human existence?
Well,
live?
It's not very original. I think I've watched lots and lots of YouTube near-death experiences, and I
do too. Yeah,
and I agree with their view of the whole thing. It's a hard thing to accept because basically they're saying we plan our lives beforehand, and that even the awful things that happen are things that we planned, and that we have a very different attitude towards those things on the other side than we do here. And that's a really big change. I mean, in viewpoint, I think, in other words, that to me, these near-death experiences, that's a gigantic revelation.
Right.
I mean, humanity has never had that before. This is Aquarian age knowledge that's coming in spades, because all these people are having very similar experiences.
Right.
And taking a lot of the same truths away with it. And for instance, there's no real hell, that judgment is something you impose on yourself, not God. God does not impose judgment.
Right.
That God is love. And so, it's a big thing to know.
Right. No, and I love what you said about that, because I've been interested in near-death experiences for a long time. And I remember reading books about them, 15, 20 years ago. And the books are great, but it's different from having whole YouTube channels of thousands of people who are giving you their testimony and saying, this is what I saw. And it's just different. It hits different. Like, even for somebody like me who was immersed in the books for a while,
yeah,
different to watch hundreds of accounts of people saying, this is what I experienced. And
yeah,
it's amazing. It really is.
Some of them are really rough.
Yeah, yeah.
Some of them are really, really rough. But yeah, I only got into it very recently, meaning within the last 2 or 3 years. And my favorite channel is Thanatos, which is a Swiss channel. It's in German, but they translate on the spot. And it's has a really good interviewer, and they're very clean, I think, is what I think about it, because some of them, they're pushing stuff that I don't necessarily like.
Right. I think that's kind of common in this field of interest, is people, they're too fast to run with things without thinking them through and being careful to be precise. Even when you're dealing with ambiguous things, you have to at least strive for precision, or else you're kind of getting into crazy ideas that can hurt people. But so we're coming to the end of the hour, Martin. Thank you so much for this time. It's been fascinating, man. Is there anything else in addition to the book, Temple of the Stars? Are there any other projects or just anything you have going on that you would like to share with people?
Well, my next book is on the planets themselves, and it's going very well. It will be hard to find a publisher, I think, because it doesn't have the sexiness of Egypt and stuff like that.
Okay.
It's a pure astrology book, basically. The other thing is I'm actually planning, and we'll see, but I'm planning to make a new tarot deck
Wow. And
using the
based on
36.
the Decans and all this, or
Yes, the 36 deckhands will be the major arcana.
wow, interesting.
And then I'm doing research on the numbers through the life paths. And my basic idea is that the 1 is the sun, and 2 is Mercury, and 3 is Venus, and 4 is the moon, and 5 is Mars, like that. And then I will design the cards around, of the pips, the numbered cards around those ideas, and illustrate it with AI, and change it, but like a initial thing,
Right.
illustrate it. And I mean, I don't think it's a pipe dream, but maybe it is. I don't, And the other thing too is, since I use the Tro a lot, actually, and have been into it most of 50 years or so. And I use the Rider Waite deck. And I have problems. I know the history of the Tro, and I know the history of the Rider Waite deck. And so, there's a way in which it's a bit incoherent.
Right.
And it doesn't have a long history. I mean, I did run into, it was a popular card game in the 15th century.
Right.
And I have run into references in my reading to the card game. Yeah, they start talking about the high priestess and the emperor and stuff like that, and going, they're talking about that Tarocchi. But yeah, it didn't become an occult system until the 18th century. And so it to me, it's sort of open for grabs. To me, any system can work for divination. There's no reason why any tarot card system shouldn't work. Now, the problem is that they're really good interpreters that are already attached to, say, the Rider Waite. I use this woman, Nancy Guerin, who I think is brilliant. And I won't have that because I'm not a professional tarot reader and whatever. So, whatever. I just have this, it's an impulse.
Yeah, creative impulse, man.
That's what we're here for. Impulse. Yeah.
That's what we're here for. Hey, I get it. I make stuff. I used to stress about, like, why am I making this? No, you just make it. It's what I'm here for.
Yeah, yeah. I don't, I used to just, I don't know. I realized that, why should you impede yourself? I mean, if you want to do something, just do it.
Right.
As long as you're not hurting anyone, obviously.
Right. I agree. So, Martin, thank you so much for this time. I really appreciate it. This is fascinating stuff. And yeah, I will be looking into more of your work, and I'll be looking forward to the next projects, and I hope that tarot deck comes out.
Yeah, I do too. The acquisitions editor of Schiffer is really into the tarot, and I might be able to get some help from him. I don't know. We'll see.
That's cool.
The planets book is the one I'm trying to be a little disciplined about this stuff, because I do have a lot of irons. I have a lot of irons in the fire.
Right.
Basically. So, and trying to keep my head above water financially and stuff.
Well, I wish you luck.